Ted Cruz compared Brendan Carr to a mob boss, the way he's threatening television stations and saying it's absolutely dangerous for the government to determine which speech is okay and which is not. What's your reaction to Ted Cruz?
I think Brendan Carr is an incredible American patriot with courage. You know, it used to be, I remember in the old days that networks would have to get licensed, relicensed, and it was always a big deal. You know, they had to show honesty and integrity. When you have a network, again, I'll use the same numbers, whether it's 90 or 94 or 97, all different numbers, but when you have networks that give somebody 97% bad publicity or 94% bad publicity, I think that's dishonesty. And you know they're getting free airwaves, right? You know that, right? You get them for nothing. These airwaves, they make millions and millions of dollars. The news makes millions of dollars. ABC, your network. I mean, your network wrote very badly about me, and they had to pay me $16 million.
So you think you have a right, or that Brendan Carr has a right to take away the licenses?
I think Brendan Carr is a courageous person. I think Brendan Carr doesn't like to see the airwaves be used illegally and incorrectly and purposely horribly. Doesn't like to see a person that won the election in a landslide get 97% bad publicity before the election. I mean, it's amazing that I won the election with that, but here's what happened. The people have given your networks no credibility. They don't give them any credibility, John. If they did, they wouldn't vote for me.
Well, the media and politicians and everyone, all the editorial boards of the nation's biggest paper, including the Wall Street Journal, that wrote Mr. Kimmel's words were only moderately offensive. We want to be clear that none of this justifies the right's resort to regulatory censorship. And the premise that Democrats are more concerned about Jimmy Kimmel than they were about the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk is completely unfounded. Democrats said all the right things that all of us felt about, that it was tragic, that violence, political violence, has no place in our society. And we were met with, this is your fault, and we are at war. There's been this move today to rewrite the story of how Jimmy Kimmel ended up being indefinitely suspended, to absolve Brendan Carr of his role in this and the government's larger role in it. But the timeline just doesn't add up. I've heard, well, read the Hollywood Reporter and read the Wall Street Journal on this. I looked through all of it, and the common denominator is that Brendan Carr said to Benny Johnson, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. And the affiliates, who were already freaking out about it for sure, decided then that they were going to pull it. And so ABC and, you know, Disney in general, Bob Iger, had no choice but to do it. There are some smart Republicans that are cautioning them to come back from this line. Ted Cruz, of all people, who's the chair of the Commerce Committee, which actually has oversight over the FCC, said what Carr said there is dangerous as hell. That's right out of a mafioso. When it's used to silence conservatives, we will regret it. We should denounce it. So I understand now we don't live in cancel culture. It's just consequence culture. And you think an eye for an eye is a good solution to everything. That's what I've seen pelted at me about this. Well, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. That is not a way to run a free society. And you can't just trample on the First Amendment because something tragic and horrible happened.
You are now just saying, parroting whatever Donald Trump and the White House wants you to say. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should go back to the original Brendan Carr, who believed in the First Amendment, who believed in free speech. It is a sad commentary upon you, Brendan Carr, attorney, FCC commissioner, free speech advocate, to have sunk so low that because Donald Trump gave you this job, he has given you an offer you can't refuse, which is if you don't bend the knee, you will lose your job as the FCC chairman. What a sad price you're paying. What a sad price that you, who have committed your life to the First Amendment, to free speech, is paying just so you can have a title at a federal agency. Please stand up the same way that Susan Monarez stood up at the Center for Disease Control to say, I will not allow for the compromise of science. You, sir, should say the same thing about the compromise of the First Amendment.
Normally I like to ease in. We'd start with the life story and go from there, but I think we got to start with the elephant in the room, right? It's been quite a week. And there are so many out there that are very, very focused on what's happened with Jimmy Kimmel. And I'd be remiss if I didn't hit this head on. Talk to us a little bit about what's transpired in the last week.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here. I guess, first of all, I haven't seen this much interest in the work of the FCC since the great net neutrality repeal of 2017, where we were told that the FCC's work was going to result in the end of the internet. I think those claims have about as much factual basis as what we're seeing right now with Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, look, the reality is there's a lot of Democrats out there that are engaged in a campaign of projection and distortion. And distortion is they're completely misrepresenting the work of the FCC and what we've been doing. I saw there was a letter from some Senate Democrats that said the FCC threatened to revoke the license of Disney and ABC if they didn't fire Jimmy Kimmel, and that did not happen in any way, shape, or form. What we've been talking about at the FCC is the unique role that the FCC plays with respect to broadcast TV. And it's sort of hard to do a quick refresh or a primer for mass media on how broadcast law works, but broadcast television is fundamentally different than other forms of communication, including cable news and podcasts and people that sit there on their soapbox. And what happens at the FCC is when you have a broadcast license, there's conditions, there's a public interest standard, which means you have to operate consistent with the public interest. And one of the things that the FCC has in our case law and our precedent is this concept of a news distortion complaint. And what I spoke about last week was that when concerns are raised about news distortion, there's an easy way for parties to address that and work that out. And in the main, that takes place between local television stations that are licensed by the FCC and what we call national programmers like Disney. They work that out, and there doesn't need to be any involvement of the FCC. Now, if they don't, there's a way that's not as easy, which is someone can file a complaint at the FCC, and then the FCC, by law, as set up by Congress, has to adjudicate that complaint. And what I've been very clear in the context of the Kimmel episode is the FCC, and myself in particular, have expressed no view on the ultimate merits had something like that been filed. What our take would be one way or the other.
The longer Donald Trump's in office, the more this is just becoming a petty cancellation of anybody who criticizes Donald Trump. And I've been saying for a while now, what we need to do as a nation, right, is we need to come together and everybody just spam Donald Trump's accounts, all of his accounts with criticism. And he won't be able to do none of his agenda because he'll be too busy striking out at everybody and he can't get us all. You know, you just going around like, you're not allowed to criticize me. You're not allowed to do that. You can't spread you can't spread misinformation. You have to tell the people that I'm doing a fantastic job. And it should be illegal to criticize Donald Trump. And wouldn't it be totally cool if everyone had to do whatever Donald Trump says, and if you don't, then you have to give up your license, you have to give up your businesses, pay your tithes and offerings to Donald Trump. I mean, that's really all I'm ripping on for this video because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a 3-year-old with all the power in the world and no vision, no curiosity, no insight. This man has no real plan other than selling out as much as possible because that's who he is. He's a con artist. He's nothing through and through but a con man. That's all he is, a complete charlatan, and everybody knows it and everybody sees it. So now he's like, nobody can criticize Donald Trump because I'm totally awesome. You know, that's the depth of this. But it is an issue, obviously. But it's good to see ABC bringing Jimmy Kimmel back in the sense that public pressure indeed does work. You know, they lose all their stock dollars. They lose their subscriptions. People turn away across the political spectrum. It's not good for business. So that shows that coming together does indeed have an impact. So let's continue to come together publicly because this clown show is still 3 years to go.